It's 2016 and two trains in Germany come together in a major collision on single line bi-directional track. How does that happen in 2016 with all the computers, with all the telecommunications, with all the modern age signalling in one of the most advanced countries in the world? We're not talking about a third world train wreckage here. We're talking about Germany and two trains colliding on single line bi-directional track. Well, in actual fact, this is a very old story. I want you to come with me on a journey now back to 1878 in Australia and see what happened. The year is 1878. The tiny hamlet of Emu Plains sits quietly below the majestic Blue Mountains west of Sydney. On its escarpment sits an engineering feat marked by the Knapsack Gully Viaduct, a magnificent sandstone structure which can be viewed for miles around. Known as the Lapstone Zigzag, the railway line zigzags up the steep escarpment. Its construction was overseen by John Whitten, New South Wales Railway's chief engineer and one of the leading rail engineers in the world during the 19th century. The Blue Mountains line is a single line of track that crosses the Blue Mountains. This is another picture of it taken in the 19th century of the little town called Valley Heights. The Blue Mountains is scattered with little villages like this. The rail line over the Blue Mountains has been constructed by Whitten at a time that would embarrass most engineering firms today. The line reached Penrith at the foot of the mountains by 1862. This is a picture of Penrith Station as it then was. By 1869, the line had completely crossed the mountains to Bowenfels. By 1870 to Rydal. By 1876 to Bathurst, by 1877 to Orange, and by 1881 to Dubbo. Between 1870 and 1880, the passenger rail traffic had gone from 776,707 passenger journeys to 5,440,138 passenger journeys, all in the space of 10 years. So the pressure, not for the last time, was on rail management to make the railways more efficient. With so much traffic, the single lines were inadequate for the increased two-way demand for track access. This demand led to pressure on the safe working systems to free up the flow of traffic. This culminated in a horrific tragedy on the 30th of January 1878, when two trains collided head-on at Emu Plains. At a few minutes after 11 o'clock on Wednesday night, a through goods train collided with an up special goods train at Emu Plains, just at the bottom of the Lapstone Hill incline. The trucks piled up high, one on top of the other, and somehow caught fire, burning fiercely, casting a lurid reflection over the surrounding hills. The merchandise and the coal were in flames and scattered over the line in broken heaps. The engine drivers and the firemen had been cut to pieces. Two political giants ruled the New South Wales Railways. John Whitten, the Chief Engineer, and John Sutherland, the Minister for Railways. John Whitten wanted no change at all. He resisted the idea of staff and ticket. On the other hand, John Sutherland wanted reform. He wanted to have trains that were more freely running, and he wanted more efficient train running. To this end, each tried to exert their influence in the railways. Sutherland appointed Donald Vernon, who introduced working orders, and Whitten acted through Commissioner Ray, who cancelled the very same working orders. Thus the railways were effectively divided into two camps, and the staff didn't know who to follow. So what was the difference between Whitten's regulations and Vernon's working orders? Well, under Whitten's regulations, a train that crossed another train had to arrive 15 minutes before that service was advertised to leave in the other direction. This contrasted with Vernon's working orders, which gave discretion to the guard, and basically said if there was a doubt that a station master should telegraph ahead asking whether the line was clear, and if that clearance came, the 15 minutes could be disregarded, and basically that it was up to the guards to space the trains, provided that they had the written telegraph from the station master assuring them that the line was clear. The problem with telegraphs, of course, is that both parties have to cooperate and send them. And if half the staff are not following the same rules, this is very hard. At Kelso, this blew up on November the 5th, 1877, when Station Master Pass at Kelso sent on a freight train after sending a telegraph, but Station Master Higgs at Bathurst also sent a freight train at the same time, but he didn't send a telegraph. The head-on collision was averted by a horseman who spotted the collision, or potential collision, from a hilltop. Management ramifications for this were very rapid. Vernon immediately blamed Higgs and commended Pass. He suspended Higgs. However, Whitten intervened through Commissioner Ray, and he blamed Pass and reinstated Higgs. Minister Sutherland, whose power was quite in the ascendancy in December, reinstated Pass, promoted Vernon, and demoted Whitten.
So now where are we up to? The entire railways is in a mess. The staff don't know who to follow. Some station managers want to follow Commissioner Ray and go to the old regulations. Others want to follow Traffic Manager Vernon and send line clear reports. But the problem is now that with half the station masters not doing line clear reports, even if you wanted to do one as a station master, there's no guarantee that your neighbouring station master will oblige you. And then we have the situation with the guards. Is it up to the guards' discretion or is it not? In other words, the staff don't know who to follow, and as a result, the safe working questions are huge.
So now we come to the sad conclusion of the story. This is Locomotive 103, which was involved in the head-on collision. On the evening in question, driver John Egan, his fireman John Larkins, and the guard George Purdue set out from Bowenfells on a special goods train of 9 trucks of kerosene shale oil from Bowenfells. The train passed Katoomba at 8:25, Weatherboard, today known as Wentworth Falls, at 8:50, and arrived at Blue Mountain, today known as Lawson, at 9:25. There, Station Master John King leapt aboard the train, and it was a very slow-moving train, to ask the guard what he intended to do. George Purdue indicated that he would cross the down goods train at Wasco Siding, that is Glenbrook. He would go to Glenbrook and wait for the freight train. Thus, King sent this information to the Penrith station master by telegraph. And from then on, the train's fate was sealed. Somewhere between Lawson and Glenbrook, Guard Purdue changed his mind. He must have thought that he could make Penrith, where he lived, by 11 o'clock, but also that this freight train he was crossing was quite often late, so he obviously thought that he could make it in time. His watch was later found to be 25 minutes slow, but surprisingly, in those days, many stations had no clocks at all, including Lawson. 45 minutes was the normal time for going down the Lapstone zigzag, but Guard Purdue obviously thought that he could do it in about 15 minutes. Today, the Lapstone zigzag is a walking trail. As we go down the hill, we can imagine what those final moments before the crash would have been like. The driver of the up freight train, Egan, and the fireman of the down freight train, Wiggins, were buried here at Emu Plains Cemetery, very close to the accident site. All up, 5 train crew died. Guard Purdue was charged with manslaughter. At his trial, Defence Counsel raised the management civil war over safe working within the railways as a defence. This was ruled inadmissible by the judge. However, the jury recommended mercy, and Guard Purdue was sentenced to 2 years of hard labour at Parramatta Jail. Subsequently, management expedited the introduction of ordinary staff and ticket working and block telegraph working almost immediately, and ordered the required equipment from England. And the ghost of Emu Plains became part of Australian history forever.
They are destroyed in this, Sydney's first dedicated rat furnace. You can imagine the smell of the smoke as it mixes with the aroma of the horse manure in the streets. To fight the plague, the health department sent photographers to some of the poorest areas of the rocks in Sydney to record the sordid conditions. These photos were in part to justify the rather rigid clean-up campaign, which involved the outright demolition of houses, as well as the spraying of whole streets with disinfectant. This is a typical kitchen in the rocks at that time, totally filthy. This was a typical backyard, with children laying in the filth and muck. And this was a typical butcher's shop. Anyone for steak and sausages? In response, the health authorities started to tear down unhygienic premises in the name of plague prevention. It could also have been that authorities had one eye on the forthcoming construction of the Harbour Bridge, which, of necessity, would also require the wholesale demolition of many parts of the rocks. And also many streets and drainage systems were sprayed with disinfectant and cleansing agents, the wholesale effect of which was to seriously impede the plague. In the meantime, there was action happening at the other end of town, where many plague victims were actually buried, and new construction was about to occur. After 2 royal commissions, Sydney's third central station was about to be constructed on the old Sandhill Cemetery at Devonshire Street. Up to this point, there had been 2 prior Sydney stations. This is the first one that was built in 1855 and lasted through to 1874. And this is the second Sydney Central Railway Station. Built in 1874 and designed by John Whitten, it started off with 2 platforms, ultimately landed up with 13. As you can see, it was a rather magnificent building, but it soon became far too congested for the traffic. It is perhaps pertinent to note here that yesterday's railway workers were not dressed in high visibility vests. Occupational health was not a priority. And so it was that on the 30th of April 1902, Minister O'Sullivan laid the foundation stone for Sydney's third, and up to this point, final central station. And this was the site upon which the new Sydney terminal was to be built. Many famous landmarks. Over here is Belmore Park and Gardner Road, which was to become Eddy Avenue. Here was a women's refuge, one of Sydney's only women's refuges at that time. Over here was a police barracks, housing 100 of the state's finest. And here was Sydney's first steam tram depot. Sydney in the 1800s had used steam trams to haul double-deck carriages around. The double-deck carriages had formerly been hauled by horses. Now the little steam trams ploughed the tramroads. This picture was taken at the corner of Market Street and Elizabeth Street. This picture was taken at the intersection of Oxford Street and Liverpool Street. Again, the cute little steam tram ploughing its way through the city with the beautiful double-deck floats behind. And this was the forebear of the State Transit Authority, a genuine horse bus, on the corner of Devonshire Street and George Street. These trams and buses were to evolve into a system of electric trams, like these seen on George Street in Sydney in the late 1890s. And the visitors to the cemetery for this purpose are increasing. As progress was made towards the completion of the station, you can see in the far distance of the construction site the Sandhill Cemetery itself stripped bare of bodies and revealed and peeled back to the bare sandhills that were underneath it. On the 4th of August 1906, the new station terminal was now open. At first, trains had to proceed through the second station to arrive at the new Sydney terminal. This is a view of the end of one of the platforms of the current Central Station, looking through at the second Sydney terminal. As finished in 1906, you can see the predominance of the main roof over the structure, and of course you can see that the station is still not what it is today. During World War I, construction of the clock tower started. The clock itself was not to be finished till 1921. Other floors were also added to the building during this period. But in all this, what about the unclaimed bodies? The bodies came out here, to Eastern Suburbs Cemetery. When they moved the bodies, there were some 30-odd thousand headstones. Today, only about 2,000 are left. These poor souls, some of whom had been found buried alive, have finally found their resting place at Botany Cemetery. Many of these graves had been disturbed twice in their existence, firstly to be moved from Town Hall to Devonshire Street, and then secondly from Devonshire Street to Botany. There they rest today. In viewing this video, I hope you've been able to appreciate just how hard life must have been for people at the end of the 19th century as well as the early 20th century. And to those people who built New South Wales, this film is dedicated.
I'm here in Sydney's Central Station, and did you know that this is actually the third incarnation of Central Station? The first was built a little bit further south in Redfern along Cleveland Street in 1855, and itself replaced in 1874 by a second station in the same location. Later, the line was extended north past Cleveland Street and over Devonshire Street to Central Station's current location here alongside Eddy Avenue. Devonshire Street underneath the tracks was closed off to cars, leading to the current Devonshire Street pedestrian tunnel. And if you are to take that tunnel west out to Regent Street, you will find the last remaining part of the old Central Station. I'm here at Mortuary Station, the last remaining part of the Rookwood Cemetery line that was built in 1864 in order to service Rookwood Cemetery, located next to Lidcombe Station in Sydney's west. Originally a spur line, trains would depart from the city and stop at stations along the way before terminating at one of the 4 stations on the sprawling 268-hectare site that was Rookwood Cemetery. In 1869, this platform was built on Regent Street, just south of Central Station, and serviced funeral trains bound not just for Rookwood Cemetery, but also Sandgate Cemetery in Newcastle and Warrenora General Cemetery in Sutherland. In 1948, the line was closed with all 4 stations in Rookwood Cemetery dismantled. One of those stations was transported to Canberra and rebuilt as the All Saints Church in 1958. Mortuary Station remains and can be seen from most trains approaching the city on the left-hand side before they reach Central Station. Petersham Station on Sydney's T2 Inner West line has 2 disused elements. The first one, found on the northern side of the tracks along Terminus Street, is this first-class platform. It was the only first-class station built in Sydney during the 19th century, and was built in 1885 after the original Petersham Station was demolished from its original location up on the northern side and rebuilt here as a current island platform. The second element is on the southern side of the station and is this former turnback siding where trains would terminate, turn around and return their journey towards the city. Today it is used as a training facility containing a train on its own set of tracks and a bus. The T1 Northern Line crosses the Parramatta River here between Rhodes and Meadowbank stations, and originally did so on this, the Meadowbank Bridge, which was built in 1886. By 1980, it had been replaced by the adjacent John Whitten Bridge, which carried 2 tracks but had the potential to be expanded to 4. The John Whitten Bridge is named after John Whitten, who was the designer of the original Meadowbank Bridge. In fact, you can still see some evidence of the original tracks just down here, crossing on the Meadowbank Bridge itself. By the year 2000, the Meadowbank Bridge had been refurbished and reopened, and now carries pedestrians and bike riders. The Royal National Park line opened in 1886 and continued to operate until 1991. By 1993, it reopened as part of this Sydney's Tramway Museum.
Heritage trams like the San Francisco Streetcar run once an hour on Sundays and Wednesdays.
The Royal National Park line ran from Loftus to the Royal National Park Station, located here, which is the terminus of the tram trips from the Sydney Tramway Museum. The Eastern Suburbs line began construction in 1948, but was not completed until 1979, over 30 years later. 4 platforms were originally planned, 24 through to 27. However, only platforms 24 and 25 were ever built. Evidence of platforms 26 and 27 still exists in the elevator down to platforms 24 and 25, but just like the unused platforms, the button remains inactive. St James Station was originally built in 1928 and planned with 4 platforms in mind. However, only 2 were ever built. You can still see just behind me one of the 2 tunnel portals where the trains were meant to go through, and another one just over there, with the tracks meant to be running down along through here with the 2 island platforms on either side of me. That means we still have a lot of tunnelling through St James Station that was never used, that has in fact been used for movies such as the Matrix movies or the Australian horror film The Tunnel. The original plan for St James was that these 2 tracks would have a western suburbs line going underneath Parramatta Road and then an eastern suburbs line heading towards Bondi Junction. Wynyard Station originally had 6 platforms. Today it has 4, platforms 3 and 4, and also platforms 5 and 6. Now to find the original platforms 1 and 2, we need to exit the station and go up a set of escalators. Here we are at the original platforms 1 and 2 of Wynyard Station. It no longer looks like platforms 1 and 2, it's now actually a car park. But it was converted into that car park after being used for trams that used to cross the eastern 2 lanes of the bridge, which would terminate here at Wynyard Station, where passengers could get off and change to trains. In fact, you can still see what the tunnels used to look like. Just through here is the iconic archway of Sydney's underground railway tunnels, through which the trams and then hopefully later trains out to the northern beaches would have run. When the Eastern Suburbs line was first built, there was plans for an additional station at Woollahra. That station was never built, but a cutting still exists, and you actually pass through it between Edgecliff Station and Bondi Junction Station. And here is the original site of the Woollahra station. The platform was going to be in the middle. It's all open up, but it was never built. Prior to the completion of the Sydney Harbour Bridge in 1932, the North Shore line used to terminate at Milsons Point, where passengers would get off their trains and then board a ferry to go into the city. The only thing is, that Milsons Point station was not this one, it was a little bit further down, close to the harbour. The original site of Milsons Point station was actually right here where the current Milsons Point pool is, just adjacent to Luna Park. The decision to have it here was so that it would be next to the ferry wharf, so North Shore line passengers would get off their train here at Milsons Point station and then walk right across over here to Milsons Point ferry wharf and board a ferry to go to Circular Quay. When the current St Leonard station opened in the year 2000, it was built with 2 island platforms. The idea was to extend it out to have 4 separate platforms with 4 separate tracks. You can still see where one of the tracks was meant to be, just over here, which was the location for platform number 1. That's no longer going to happen because the Sydney Metro plan is for an underground station just a little bit further out at Crow's Nest. But it does explain why St Leonard's, lacking a platform 1 and a platform 4, only has platforms 2 and platform 3.
I'm about to head off. The first issue that I had today was about 3-4 hours ago, just before I went to bed, when I realized that the plan I had set up actually wasn't going to work. There was an incorrect transfer made at Granville, and I was going to miss the train by about 3 minutes, so I had to fix that up and push the plan back by almost an hour. My current plan will be finished in about 17 hours, 25 minutes, but I'm only running on about 3 hours of sleep, so it is going to be a very long day. I've got everything packed right here in my bag. About a day's worth of food. I'm hoping to get through all of that in 17.5 hours. The idea of the All Stations Challenge is to get to all 176 stations in the Sydney Trains network. So it's everything up to Berowra and Richmond, and Emu Plains and Macarthur, and Waterfall, Cronulla, Bondi Junction. It includes the Carlingford line and the Olympic Park station. There are, last I checked, 8 of us who are taking this challenge today. It used to be known by various names, including the City Rail Challenge and the All Day Challenge. We're meeting at Central Station at 5:30 in the morning. You're allowed to start any time after 5:30, and your time goes from the first train that you get on up until the last train that you get off. You must start and end both at Central Station. You are only allowed to take the train. You can leave a station, but you must enter back into that station before continuing on. So all travel must be on train. To be honest, the only point where that really might help at all to break that rule would be to go between, say, Erskineville and McDonaldtown. It is apparently theoretically possible to do this in about 15.5 hours. My plan takes about 17.5 hours. It starts by going west to Lidcombe via Strathfield, then returning back to the city via Bankstown. From Redfern, I take a T4 Illawarra line train down to Cronulla, and then another one to Waterfall, and then complete the line by returning to Bondi Junction. I take a Bondi Junction train to Town Hall, where hopefully I can make a 2-minute dash to get a train that goes via the city circle out to the airport line and then out to Revesby. That is one of the critical moments of the day. I only have 2 minutes, and it's quite a tricky move to get from one end of Town Hall Station to the other. If I do make it, then a change at Revesby will take me out to Macarthur and then back up to complete the stations on the Bankstown line that I missed earlier, and then up to Granville, where I will head out west to complete the western ends of the Western Line out to Richmond and also Penrith. I will be returning back and then heading up north to do the northern and north shore lines, at which point I return back to Central. Now, if I do miss that 10:48 train that goes through the city circle, then I have to complete the city circle right at the end, and that will add quite a few minutes to my time. However, that is pretty much the only tricky point at this moment. There is an opportunity at Granville, if the train heading out west on the Western Line is late, to catch that train and significantly reduce my total time. I'm on a Bankstown line train heading back towards the city. I have done the Inner West line, made it through to Lidcombe. I'm now looping back around. Everything is going to plan so far, except that real-time data is no longer working. So I'm really hoping that that comes back online soon, because I'm really relying on real-time train location information to keep on top of my plans for the day and make up any lost time or tricky transfers. I finished the Inner West line and I've come back to Redfern via Bankstown. Now I am on a Tangara headed down towards Hurstville. I'm going to finish the Illawarra line, both Cronulla and Waterfall, and then head back up to Bondi Junction, and that should get me through to the end of the morning rush hour and hopefully avoid most of it. I'm in the Shire heading up to Cronulla. This is the first time I've done this in summer, so it's been daylight hours for a little bit longer than I'm normally used to. Despite that, I got very little sleep last night and I'm now very tired, even though it's only 8 AM and there is still about 12 to 14 hours left to go. I've only been doing this for about 2.5 since I got on the first train. Don't know how I'm going to be able to survive. About to reach Glenfield. I've done the entire of the T4 line from Cronulla, Waterfall and up to Bondi Junction, then went around the city circle out to Revesby via the airport line, and I'm now headed down to Macarthur. Once I reach Macarthur, the plan is to go up towards Granville, but first finish off the bit of the Bankstown line that I haven't yet finished, and then after that go off and do the Western line. That leaves the Northern and North Shore lines to finish right at the end of the day. I'm waiting at Macarthur Station. Everything so far has gone according to plan. So just a quick recap of the day so far. I caught a train from Central at 6:33. It arrived at Homebush, where I changed for another train to get me to Lidcombe at 6:22 AM. Then at 6:26 AM, I caught a train to Redfern via Bankstown, which got me to Redfern at 7:14 AM, where I caught 5 minutes later a train on the T4 line down to Hurstville. From Hurstville, the train terminated, and 6 minutes later I caught a train to Cronulla. That train turned around at Cronulla, took me back to Sutherland,
At 8:45 I arrived at Sutherland, and then at 8:53 caught another train down to Waterfall, which arrived at 9:07. I got a 17-minute break down in Waterfall, which gave me the opportunity to go to the toilet. And at 9:24 I caught a train all the way up to Bondi Junction, which arrived at 10:30, crossed the platform to the other train at Bondi Junction, and at 10:33 it left for Town Hall. Arrived at Town Hall at 10:46, which gave me just enough time to cross over to the other platform, and at 10:48 caught a train around the city circle and out to Revesby. Arrived at Revesby at 11:38, and then 3 minutes later caught a train at 11:41, which took me out to Macarthur. I'm now waiting at Macarthur. I need to head up to Glenfield, where I'll be changing for another train to get to Cabramatta, and then at Cabramatta I will need to go and finish what's left of the Bankstown line. Upon my return to Cabramatta I will be rushing off to Granville, where hopefully the train that goes to Emu Plains will be running at least 3 minutes late. If it is, then I can still get a good time out of today. If not, it'll be about 17.5 hours, but at least I'm still on track to finish this, even though it will potentially be a 17.5 rather than a 16.5 hour day.
Nope, looks like I missed it. I'll get the next one in 10 minutes.
Sydney most definitely does not have a shortage of public transportation. I prefer taking a bus, but during rush hour traffic, trains are definitely going to be a better option. The Sydney Commuter Railway serves 178 stations over 815 kilometres of track. The trains operate around 20 hours a day with a break between midnight and 5 a.m. During these hours you can catch a night bus. There are 3 ways that you can get a ticket. You can either go to a ticketing clerk and ask them to issue you a single journey ticket to your destination. If there's no ticketing clerk, then you can go to the vending machine and buy a ticket yourself. The best case scenario, in my opinion, would be to use an Opal pay-as-you-go tap-on, tap-off smart card. This is a contactless smart card that you use on most of the public transportation in New South Wales. You can grab an Opal card right at the airport as you arrive, or at selected stores around the city. I don't often get confused when taking public transport, but the Sydney trains sure gave me a run for my money. Thank goodness I had an Opal card and Google Maps, else it might have become a very long and frustrating situation. For example, I'm at a relatively small train station and I want to go to St. James's Station. I simply drop a marker on my maps and ask for directions. It gives me not only directions and options for transport of buses as well as trains, but also tells me which train, what time it will come, and which platform I should go to catch this train. That's quite important because it's quite confusing how the platforms work. In this case, I'm going to go to platform 9. Be warned though, sometimes the trains share platforms. So have a look at the display board to make sure that the approaching train does in fact go to your destination. With the Opal card, it's very easy to get on and off public transport in Sydney. Trains, ferries, buses all work on the same tap-on, tap-off system. When you get in the station, you wave your card or tap your card on the card reader and the gates will open. And when you get off, you do the same thing. The system will automatically deduct the fare from your card. However, be warned that some stations do not have clearly marked gates. They're just simply a steel pillar as you pass. Remember to tap off before you leave the station. Sydney gets quite congested during peak hours, like I've said before. So if you're traveling during those hours and you have the option to take a train, I would suggest that you do that instead of a bus. Planes and trains and everything going over at the same time. Jeez. So this is an Opal card. It's about the size of a credit card, and it is a contactless smart card, pay-as-you-go card, that you use to pay for just about any kind of public transportation inside of Sydney. You can get your Opal card right as you arrive at the airport, and you can use it right away to take the airport link from the airport to the city. Alternatively, there are over 1,000 retailers selling it, including 7-Eleven as well as Woolworths. Some of the train stations will also have Opal kiosks where you can buy it. Or you can go online and pre-order a card. You can even register a card with your name and address. There's more than one benefit by using this card. The most obvious is the ease and convenience. No need to stand in line to try and purchase a ticket and figure out how much you need to pay and where you're going. Simply tap or swipe the card in front of the card reader at the train station or the bus or the ferry terminal. The gate will open and you're good to go. When you get to your destination, again tap off before you leave the station. Some of the stations don't have gates, they just have card reader pillars. So make sure that you find that pillar and tap off before you leave. Another benefit of this card is that they have great special deals, weekly deals as well as daily. For example, they cap your travel expenses per week. And since I was traveling around all week long on the card, by Friday I'd already reached that cap. So most of my Saturdays and Sundays traveling inside Sydney was free. If you're gonna recharge your card with a credit card, it's really easy. You can do it at almost every train station. You'll find a little Opal kiosk and you can just recharge it with your credit card. Alternatively, if you want to use cash, you'll have to go to a certified kiosk or a retailer and give them cash and they'll top it up for you. Thank you. And if you're leaving Sydney and you still have money left on your card, you can also go to one of these retailers or kiosks and they will refund you the balance on your card. Sydney is a very pedestrian-friendly city. You're definitely going to do a lot of walking in the city, so best you bring a nice pair of shoes. That being said, they also have a nice selection of public transport to choose from. First you have taxi cabs. Very easy and convenient and quick as long as you're not traveling in rush hour traffic. However, I find them also very expensive. In addition to the cost of traveling, there are also different rates for different times. There's also a rate for booking a taxi as well as a rate for waiting. So while I was here, I really didn't take many taxis at all. An easier and probably more affordable option to taxis would be Uber. As far as I know, Uber runs really well in Sydney and is quite convenient and easy to get from anywhere in the city. Other than taxis and Uber, there are also trains, light rails, ferries and buses. All of those use a contactless card called the Opal card, which is a pay-as-you-go card. You can get this card at the airport, at 7-Eleven, Woolworths and at a bunch of retailers and kiosks, as well as some train stations. Sydney trains are, for the most part, very reliable and very affordable. But due to the size of this city, you most likely might still have to take a bus or walk a bit from the station to your destination. The trains here are slightly more complicated to navigate than trains I've taken in other countries. Also, some of the trains share platforms. So even if you make it to the platform where you need to be, you still need to look at the display board to make sure that the next train coming is in fact the train that you want to take. My saving grace for taking trains and any kind of public transportation actually in Sydney was Google Maps. Not only does it give you the times of departure, but also shows you the platforms of departure. There's also a little train that runs in the west of the city. It's called the Light Rail. I took this from Central Station, and again I had issues finding where this little train took off from, but eventually I did find it, and once I was on the light rail, it was actually a very enjoyable and fun ride. It's a bit like a tram, and it runs through the streets of the city, so you have a nice little view as you're on the train. My favorite mode of transport for sure was buses. There was a bus station right outside of where I lived, and with the help of Google Maps, I could plan and find exactly which times to depart and which buses to take. There are bus stops all over the city, and it will most definitely get you to where you need to be. During rush hour traffic, the bus might take a tad longer, but overall it was my preferred mode of transport. A ride on a bus will cost you approximately $3. If you do need to take transportation after hours, they also have something called night buses. There are fewer night buses than day buses, and they also stop at fewer stations, but they will probably still get you within a fraction of the cost of where you need to be than a taxi, for example. The most fun you'll have traveling around the city, I reckon, will be by ferry. Most of the ferries run from Circular Quay, and they go to Manly, they go to Watson's Bay and a couple of other places. It's very convenient and very picturesque, and it's definitely something that you should try if you're in Sydney. The nice thing about public transport in Sydney, besides the fact that it is convenient and safe and clean, is if you're using your Opal card, there's a cap on it, a weekly cap, So for example, in my case, I already reached that weekly cap by Friday. So most Saturdays and Sundays while I was here, I was traveling for free.